Well, good morning, everybody out there. Good to see you today on this beautiful, sunny, cold morning. It's the best. I love it out there right now. My name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors here. And after the service, I always stand out by the doors. And I say that because maybe you're a guest with us today. This is your first time checking us out. Maybe your second time, whatever else. But we have not connected yet. I would love to meet you after the service. And so I'm just perched out there. Just come by. Don't worry. It won't be like the 20 questions. Just shake your hand, get to know you, say hi. That would be fantastic. So please stop by because we want you to feel welcomed here at Redemption Church. That is really important to us. Beyond that, reminder, I know that Trent was just sharing it, but next week we start Leviticus, and I am stoked about this. Like, honestly, I remember when I first, a few years back, felt led to do the first 5 books of the Bible, one each year, right? That I was like, Genesis is going to rock. Exodus is going to be fantastic. Leviticus, I'm scared to death, right? Like, that was my thing. Like, what am I going to do with Leviticus? But I just felt like God wanted us to do that. The more I've invested some time in this, the more I honestly, even this morning I was praying, I'm like, God, I pray that Leviticus is a catalyst moment for our church. That's how big a deal I think this is going to be. I think it's going to be not only helpful, but it's going to be healing for our lives. And so there's a lot more in there than you think there might be. Now, to maximize that, we're doing this whole thing, I keep calling it Leviticus, but celebrating the season of Lent as we go through Leviticus. Lent begins this Wednesday. It's Ash Wednesday this Wednesday. And so with that, I sent out a little video via email yesterday. You might watch that video. It's about 6 minutes long. It just gives you a sense of my heart behind this, some of the things that I've decided to set aside as holy during this particular season, since we're not focusing on the suffering of Christ, but rather we're focusing on what it means to be holy and set things apart as holy. So I've kind of shared some of that. But we invite all of you to be a part of this. This is going to be a part of the spiritual journey of Leviticus, is finding something in our life that we set aside as holy to focus on this thing that God gives us to bring healing, because holiness is all about healing. And so, again, can't stress it enough, everybody to be a part of the season of Lent starts this Wednesday, which means Tuesday is when you binge everything that you're going to set aside as holy. Like, that's the tradition, actually. It's like, I'm going to give up chocolate, so I'm going to eat 6 pounds of chocolate. Like, that was what they would do. That's Tuesday. So for me, it's going to mean I need to binge all kinds of internet content, because come Wednesday, I'm internet free for 6 weeks. So it should be fascinating. All right. So anyway, it's going to be a great thing all the way around. Looking forward to it. Beyond that, I just want to pray this morning, get us ready for this last message in our series on Jesus Asks, and have our hearts kind of set up for that. So let's go ahead and pray together. Jesus, so often, I have this series of requests from you, and I think they're all good requests. But today, I find that where my heart is so at is that we would be people who are profoundly needy of you every day, all throughout the day. Right? It's not about us just trying to do life. It's not about us being that smart, that determined, that hardworking, that coping, whatever else, but rather that we would look at all of the nuances of life and say, man, how do I ask more of God to be a part of all of those things? How do I allow my life to be guided by the Spirit and all the things of life? That's what I ask that you would do a work in us today with, that you would bring those pieces to bear in our lives. And so we just ask you to show up. We ask you to do some surgery on us. We ask you to spark a hunger in us of dependency so that we go to you every day. And I think even for the season of Lent, setting aside, though, something is holy, all the more that you would use that even to do a thing in our lives. And so we welcome you. We plead with you to be more real and do more things that shape us more into your image. And so, Jesus, we love you and we thank you in your good and perfect name. Amen. So I have now been either an intern or a pastor in church life for almost 30 years. That kind of freaks me out when I think about it. Like, wow, it's already been that long. I'm already in the third quarter of life. All of that kind of crystallizes. And over the course of that time, I've read a lot of books and articles and blogs and posts and you name it. I've read it, but I would have to say that in my world, there's probably like just 5 books that I would say were the life changers. Like, they were the ones that shaped some of the deepest stuff in my being. And among those are 2 particular books that are interesting. One is from an author that is still alive. His name's John Piper. And he wrote a book called Desiring God. But Piper was inspired by a dude that's long since dead named Henry Scougal. And that's the other book that's made a huge impact on my life, and it's called The Life of God and the Soul of Man. And if you read it, it sounds like Shakespeare. It's just so old, and it's so wordy and verbose, and it's just dripping with imagery. And for some, it's really tough to read. For me, I read it, and it's like breath in my lungs. It's just like life to my bones, because the whole thrust of that book that inspired Piper to write his book is the idea that God is designed life to be found in him, and our greatest joy, our greatest pleasure, our greatest sense of fullness of life, where life is best, it's found with him, right? And so he is the source of all delight and desire. That is the kind of the epicenter of their thesis in these particular works. And from this, they kind of go into this weird spot. They say the tendency is for us as Christians in particular to think that pleasure is bad and we just need to have raw determination and that's good. And they go, no, God built us to enjoy. God built us for pleasure. But our sin is not that we are too great a pleasure seeker. Our sin is that we are too easily pulled into lesser pleasures that don't really fill us up. Money is my pleasure. Sex is my pleasure. Alcohol is my pleasure. Play is my pleasure. And they're lesser things in comparison to the greatest pleasure that can be experienced, and that is a pleasure that flows from God. And so this really, like I said, grabbed me because I go, it's so true in my own life. I go, man, I just settle for lesser things, and God's like, I'm telling you, I've got better things for you. Greater things, so much so that when I'm the center, when life is better with me, then the other things of your life are better too. Your marriage is going to be better with me. Your life will be better with me. Your perspectives will be better with me. Your suffering will be better with me because I am the source of the best type of life. God is the source of the best. And my heart today is that we will embrace that God is the source of the best. And that we will hunger in our daily lives for more of him to enrich our lives. This is why I'm always quoting to us John chapter 10, verse 10, when Jesus says, I came to give you life and that it would be abundant. True abundant life, right, is found in him. And so this is central to my thinking today because it's the essence of the question that Jesus asks. Today, in this final installment, Jesus asks the question, what do you want me to do for you? And is it big enough? What do you want me to do for you? And is it big enough? In other words, is your dream big enough? Is your heart, is it big enough? Is your passion, is it big enough? Is your need big enough? Is your agenda big enough? Is your want big enough? And in that, here's the real probing thing. Do we fully understand what all of that might mean? Right? That's where I'm trying to drive us a little bit this morning. And so the place I want to start, and if you're taking notes, we have notes in our app and you can follow along. But the place I want to start is that when it comes to this whole idea, the first thing is that Jesus calls us to ask, right? If we're talking about wanting God to do big things, we in part have to realize that Jesus is very pro us asking that he and the Father and the Spirit would do some big things. In fact, last week we looked at do not judge lest you be judged, right? And it's out of this huge epic sermon that Jesus preached one day sitting on a hillside. And the whole message that he preaches is really saying, you know what, the world is designed under certain rules and conditions, and it's very broken. And I have an inbreaking of a new culture, a new reality, a new world. It's called the kingdom, my kingdom, and it doesn't work like the way the world does. And he starts to outline all the ways we're to be different. If people follow Jesus, we're followers in training, and this is how we're going to look. And so he starts to say all these things that are very counterintuitive to the way life works. Things where we lay ourselves down, where we're willing to turn the other cheek, where we go the extra mile, where we don't exploit people, we don't harm people. And then with that, he's like, and you're going to get throttled sometimes in that. Therefore, do not judge, lest you be judged. And we go, man, that is so hard. That is so hard in a broken world to not be judgmental and not be selfish and self-interested and have our ego rubbed wrong, and therefore we want to retaliate all these things. And so he's like, but I'm telling you, that's the nature of my kingdom. And we go, no, but it's how do you even do that? And then he immediately goes into, well, you need to ask. You need to ask. In fact, that's Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 7. He says, ask, and it will be given. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and the one who seeks finds, and the one who knocks, it's going to be opened. He says, come on, man, you guys know how this works. If you're a parent and your kid asks you for something good, you don't give them something useless or dangerous, right? He says, you don't do it that way. And he goes, and in the same way, right? He says, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Now, what I love about this is a couple of things. One is that you get this sense of command and then promise. The command is what? Ask, seek, knock. Those are things we're instructed to do. And he says, and if you ask, you're going to receive. If you seek, you're going to find. So now there's a promise attached to it. So there's a sense of pressing into all of this. And then more than that, he says, and understand, God wants to give you and I good gifts. He doesn't want to just give us ho-hum gifts, whatever gifts. He wants to give true, legitimate, good gifts. Now here's the trick. There are many things that we ask for in life. We go to God and say, God, I need this and I need that. And we go, that would be great if you would do this. But God looks and goes, those would be bad gifts if I gave them to you. You think they would be great. You think they would be fantastic for your life. But I see your life more clearly. I see it better than you see it. What you think would be a good gift may in fact be a bad gift. It would be me, instead of giving you a fish, giving you a scorpion if I gave you what you want. And so God says, no, I want to give good things. And sometimes to give you good things, I don't give you what you most think is a good thing. Right? So, for example, we could all pray like, Jesus, let me win the lottery. Right? Or we can pray, let me get into my dream college. Or let me have that relationship in my life. Or we can pray, let them accept the offer on the house, Jesus, please. Whatever it is. We've all had those things, right? And sometimes in those contexts, not always, right? I'm not saying always, but I'm saying sometimes in those contexts, when we're praying for those kinds of things, it's less a prayer of faith saying, God, I want your very best, and so do whatever you want to do. It's a little bit more like we're treating God like a good luck charm, kind of, hey, rub the bottle, the genie lamp, and do this wish thing for me that I want for myself, right? It's like God becomes like a lucky rabbit's foot that we're praying, just let them accept the offer. Let them accept me in their college. And can I tell you, by the way, the weirdest thing in the world just came to mind, rabbit's foot. There's like all these three-legged rabbits running around. Like these poor rabbits are like, I gotta give up my lucky foot for these stupid people to rub it. Like, that's the weirdest thing we have. All right, so anyway, it's a sidebar, all right, pops into my head sometimes. Okay, but that's sort of what we do with God, right? I mean, sometimes that's gonna be the tendency. And so we gotta remember, he wants to give truly good gifts. And if we are followers in training, that's what we push as a church, that everybody is seeking to develop fit habits, and fit means followers in training. So we're wanting to be like Jesus, act like Jesus, think like Jesus, and process life through the eyes of Jesus, his big priorities, his goals and objectives. What this then means for us in the asking, right? There's another element, and it's number 2 in your notes. Jesus calls us to think before asking. To really think, like, okay, I want to think through, I'm getting ready to make a request. Is this request, does it sound like Jesus, or does it sound like me? Does it sound like the kingdom, or does it sound like the earth? Does it sound like just the American dream, or does it sound like the kingdom vision? I mean, those are the things that we want to try to ascertain in all of this. And to do this, we're going to be looking at a section that is both in Matthew chapter 20 and Mark chapter 10. And so these stories are congruent, right? So the very first piece of literature in the New Testament is Matthew, and then after that is Mark. Matthew's very long, Mark's very short, but there's a lot of times where they sync up and they tell the same story from slightly different points of view. And we're going to look at two stories that are in both of these Gospels, and they exist as comparison and contrast stories, right? So both writers saw the value of butting these stories up back to back, and they tell a story in and of themselves, right? The two separate stories tell a combined story by comparison and contrast. Now, this is all going to point us into the idea of asking and thinking being coupled together. You got to think in light of asking. Now, set the stage. You're going to see a harmony between Matthew and Mark. I'm going to have them kind of harmonize so you get the full story. But it starts out like this. It says, "And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem. And Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid." Now, to give you a sense of this, Jesus is now days away from his arrest, his betrayal, his beating, his mocking, and his crucifixion. And with the crucifixion, it's not going to just be that humans pour out their wrath on God, but it's also going to be that the Father pours out wrath on the Son for our sins. And so Jesus is going to get double punched at the cross. Like, I think we forget that. We're like, oh, people were so terrible and vile to Jesus and he was doing it for them. I'm like, right. But the other part is, to do it for them, he needed to take the full fury and wrath of the punishment of God for our sins that we deserved. So in that sense, it's like Jesus is fighting in the octagon with two different people beating him the whole time. That's the cross, right? That's the scene. And he's on his way to that. This is why he's so intense in the picture. People are watching him, and it's like, man, he's not even paying attention. He's just determined to it, and they're afraid. They're like, I don't even know what to do with this, right? That's where you have him right now. Lots of internal just weight is in the picture, all right? So it says he took the 12 disciples aside, and this is what he said to them. He said, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death. And then they will deliver him over to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and spit on him and flog him, and they will kill him. But then after 3 days, he will rise again." In that little chunk there, you see the intensity, right? I mean, there's a lot there. And in that, you also see the resolve of God to execute and fulfill his big dream. God's big dream is to reconnect us with himself. This thing lost in the very first book of the Bible, first 3 chapters, it all falls apart. And God has been working through the ages, through people, through a nation, across the world to bring people to himself and to reclaim. And that's all going to center on the cross. And so his big dream is in view. And with that, you see God's cost to the big dream. That I will send my Son, he will come, he will suffer, he will die, so that they may live and they may be reclaimed. That's all in this section. So when God has big dreams, big visions, big objectives, he also is willing to go all in on those. When you sometimes feel like God calls you to suffer for his big dream, and you're like, how was that fair? I'm like, well, talk to him. He had a big dream, and he was willing to suffer for the big dream. He didn't sin, but he was willing to take ownership of our sin and do what we couldn't do, right? And so all of this is what Jesus is sharing at this point. And imagine in that moment how much weight is gotta be just on him. Like, just, you think about in just a few days, he's gonna be praying in a garden, and his buddies are all asleep because they just can't show up to the scene and be there for their friend, right? And you see the magnitude of just the sheer volume of almost even terror that it says at that time. So pretty weighty stuff. And so he pours it out to his friends, right? Imagine you going to your friends and saying, you know what? I just found out I have stage 4 cancer. I'm gonna die really soon. Or I just found out that my child is an addict and I'm just coming to share this burden, right? Or my marriage is falling apart and you share this burden. And sharing the burden, you're going to have this sense of like, I'm giving it to my friends so that they could bear my weight, right? So that they could be there for me in this. And so he shares it with these guys. And you would think at this point, they'd be like, Jesus, what do we need to do? Jesus, how can we stop this from happening? You would think they just hug him and cry with him or reject it and say, why are we going up to Jerusalem then? Let's bang it out back to Galilee. This is stupid. You're not going to die. And any number of things they could have done. Now, here's exactly what happens. As soon as he say, I'm going to die, I'm going to suffer, it's going to be awful, but I'll rise again. It says, then the mother of the sons of Zebedee came to him with her sons, kneeling before him and asking for something. Right? In fact, in Mark it says, then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and they said, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. It's like you go to your friend, you say, I have stage 4 cancer, and they're like, yeah, can I borrow your car? My kid is off the rails. Oh, yeah, can I borrow your blower? It's so, like, heartless. It's like Jesus says, I'm going to die for the sins of the world. And they're like, yeah, bro, whatever. Hey, by the way, we have a request, and whatever it is, you need to do. That's crazy to me. And on top of it, apparently, they bring their mom, right? I mean, that's the nuttiest part of all. They're like, you got to do whatever we say. And she's like, and my boys are the best boys. Right? James and John, the other 10 losers. Do what my boys want. Right? That's her. That's how she sounded, I'm positive. It's like immediately they blow by his words for the sake of their wants. They don't think before they ask. They just say, this is what we want. I don't know what God's saying right now. He's speaking about something, cross, people, mocking, death, whatever. I did. Here's what I need right now. Not interested in what you want, Jesus. I'm interested in what I want here. These guys have followed him for 3 years. They've watched. They've seen. There's been a lot of mileage here. And then they give this response, right? For all of their eyewitnessing, they're blind. They have terrible perspective. Now, hold that story right there. Because like I said, there is a contrast story. It's the next immediate story. It's going to be a few verses down, but it's the next immediate story. It says, then they went out of Jericho, and a great crowd followed, and behold, there were 2 blind men sitting by the roadside, one being Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus. And when they heard that Jesus was passing by, they cried out, Lord, have mercy on us, son of David. And the crowd rebuked them, telling them to be silent, and then they cried out all the more, Lord, have mercy on us, son of David. Now you can start to couple the stories together. Previous story is 2 brothers who've been seeing a lot of things with Jesus, but apparently they're blind to the scene. And then you have 2 blind men, and they've just heard about Jesus. They've never seen him physically nor been in his presence apparently. But they come as blind men hoping that they may see. So we have men who have seen, but they seem to be blind. And we have men who are blind and they want to see. Now what's interesting about the 2 contrast stories is that they are coupled by the same question. The same question appears in both Matthew and in Mark in both stories. Here's the question. Whether it be to the 2 brothers and their mom or the 2 blind men, he asks, what do you want me to do for you? Right? This is how we know the writers had the intention of buckling the stories together. It's a quote. Now, here's what I love about the question. There's a couple of things. First of all, I love that what is true to the question is grace. Right? You think about it. If you just found out really bad news, if you're looking and then in a couple of days, you're going to lose your job, you're going to lose your spouse, you're going to lose a child, you're going to lose something massive, you're going to lose your house. Do you really see yourself as wanting to stop and maybe try to serve others? Right? Your house is being foreclosed upon, you see somebody with a flat, are you really going to pull over and like, I'll fix your flat, my house is going to go away, but I'm going to help you out? But he stops. All right? What can I do for you? There's grace. The other thing about this, though, is I can't help but port the question out into our own lives and think that he asks of all of us, what is it you want me to do for you? Right? Matter of fact, ever since the beginning of this series, when I knew I was going to do this question, that's kind of been the thing that has been gnawing in my mind. It's like Jesus keeps asking, hey, Matt, what is it exactly that you want me to do for you? Like, do you want the greatest, the biggest, and the best? And if you do, are you ready for me to take charge and do that? Or do you want lesser things? You're just using me as a component of your vision, but your vision beats my vision. Because if that's what it is, Matt, I'm not going to be able to show up to do everything that you're wanting me to do. Because if you want the best, then you got to let me have control. So what is exactly that you want of Jesus? This is the question that we should all ask. Do we want him to be central or just a satellite? Do we want him to control everything or just some areas? Are we willing to listen to all the things he tells us to do because life is better with him and everything that we do will make it better? Or do we go, I'm going to do some of what you tell me to do, but I'm going to decide to not do other things because those are my things and those are your things, and we'll split it up and divide it, and then we'll have the kids on the weekends and blah, like whatever it is, right? So what do we want him to do in our lives? To be God? Or just sort of be recreational? Right? It's a powerful question. Well, he asked the probing question to the first group, and we see that the Jewish mom jumps right in. She says, say to these two sons of mine, she probably says, say to these two sons of mine, right? That they are to sit at your right and at your left in your kingdom. And then the boys are like, yep, that's it. Grant us to sit at your right and your left in your glory. So here's what it is. They go, Jesus, here's what we want from you. We want privilege. We want power. We want ease. We want convenience. We want simplicity. We want glory. They don't mean we want God's glory in the truest sense. No, they want position in the midst of that. So they're just thinking not in terms of everything he's taught them, which is sacrifice, submission, service, going the extra mile, caring for the least of these. Like all of that's just gone out the window. And they're like, how do we get to the top of the ladder? We want the top story penthouse lifestyle. Jesus, give us that. That's what we are seeking, right? Fulfill our earthly wants. So they're like, give me. Not a man over midnight, but give me what I want. They want this great earthly thing, really. But in contrast, the blind men say, Lord, let our eyes be opened. Let our eyes be opened, right? Imagine if James and John would have shown up and said, Jesus, let our eyes be opened. That would have been cool. No, they want glory, right? They want prestige and power, comfort and ease and security. These guys could have asked for anything too. These blind guys could have said, you know what? We want money. We want security. We want vengeance on everybody who's mistreated us as beggars. Strike the world blind and make it all equal. Those could have been any number of things, but they simply ask for what they most need. The other guys, they asked for what they most wanted, but it wasn't a good God gift. It would have been a bad, destructive gift. These guys are asking for a good God gift. They're asking for what they need. And so it's contrasting stories. And I love it because, again, the first group is centered on themselves in the most earthly type of way possible. The second group had something that they kept crying out, have mercy. Have mercy. We can't see. Have mercy on us. We're blind. We don't even know what we don't know, right? They have a different disposition. What I find in these two stories is number 3 in your notes. Jesus often answers based on our sight or our blindness. He often answers based on our sight or our blindness. What I mean by that is we all have prayers, and sometimes he says yes, and sometimes he says no, right? The idea that God doesn't answer prayer isn't true. He just said, I said no, right? Well, you didn't answer. No, it's a no. That's why I didn't do it. But sometimes we're asking based on seeing clearly or seeing poorly, right? And so to the second group, they said, Lord, let our eyes be opened, and Jesus, in pity, touched their eyes, and immediately they recovered their sight, and they followed him. So I love it because at the most bare level, all they're saying is, we're in darkness, right? We cannot see. Please let us see. Give us sight. And Jesus is like, you know what? That's a great request. I'm going to show pity on you. I'm going to touch you, and suddenly you can see. This should be, in my thinking, the chief prayer of every follower of Jesus every single day. Lord, have mercy on me. I never quite see clearly. Let me see more clearly. Like, heal me of my human blindness. Heal me of my sinful proclivity to see the world through my eyes and not your eyes. I want more of your sight, not more of my sight, because that blinds me. Have mercy on me. Every single day, man, just praying that prayer. That would be the ultimate Christian prayer. What do you want me to do for you, Matt? Man, let me see more clearly. Let me see more clearly my enemies so that I see them through your eyes so that I love them. Let me see the lost and disenfranchised more clearly through your eyes so that I care for them. Let me see my sin through your eyes so that I fight it and resist it all the more, because with my vision, I blow it off. With my vision, I defend it. With my vision, I actually protect it. So open my eyes so that I may see. That to me is the biggest prayer of all. That's the big ask. Not here is my list like I'm giving to Santa what I want for Christmas, but rather, let me see, show me mercy. Give me your vision. What I love about this is that Jesus touches these men and they're healed, and it doesn't say they just split. It says he gives them sight, but with it apparently they also have vision because they follow. In fact, that's why back in, I think it's Mark, it actually names him Bartimaeus. You know why it says that? Because all these years later, people are like, no way, Bartimaeus was the dude that got healed with Jesus? They know him. Like, that guy rocks. I didn't know he's a blind guy that Jesus met 30 some odd years ago. That's awesome. That's why he's named. So they follow. But in contrast, the followers, the eyewitnesses, 3 years, cruising with Jesus, doing all kinds of stuff, they're somewhat blind. And so they say, let us sit at your left and your right. And he says to them, to sit at my right hand or my left hand is not mine to grant, but is for those whom it has been appointed or prepared by my Father. In other words, they say, you got to do what we want you to do. Here's what we want you to do. And he says, no. You know what the best irony probably of all is? We're all going to get there one day. And we're going to find those 2 chairs next to Jesus. You know who's on them? 2 blind dudes. Right? I would not be shocked. All right, 2 blind dudes that came to see one day. He's like, yeah, that's who God prepared it for. Right? So he tells them, no. So the 2 blind beggars see when they're blind, and from that they come to see even more, and they become followers. And then the 2 eyewitnesses who can see, they're still blind in some ways, and so Jesus must work on them. Now, what's interesting about this whole story is then from the request, there becomes this brawl among all the disciples, the apostles, like the 12. Like, I'm sure at this point, this is when the mother steps away, like, oh, the boys are fighting, right? Just let them go. And so all the 12 begin to argue and fight, and who's going to be the greatest and who's going to be the best. I have a feeling that the other 10 are angry at the 2, that the 2 beat them to the punch of the same thing they wanted to ask. Like, I think they're all just like filled with themselves a little bit at this point. They didn't have the vision that God wanted to instill in them. And this is the problem of alignment. Alignment. They're not in alignment with what God is wanting to do. And you see that as you read the story. They're all thinking like it's still going to be conquest and they're going to beat Rome and Jesus is going to be this kind of like riding on a horse with armor to kill all their foes. They still think this is a power trip. They don't understand it's a servant trip. which is what Jesus is all about, which is why he then tells them, whoa, wait, like the Gentiles are crazy. Don't do it like them. You're here to serve, not to be served. I came to serve, not to be served. So he rebukes them and tries to give them some new vision. And so what we see in all of this is that the first story is a bunch of earthly ask. The second story kind of gives hints of a bigger, truer ask. And that's true for us if we want the most pleasure, the most joy, the most fulfillment in life, where life is better, then we want God's big ideas. We want to ask God the biggest ask of all, which is, show me mercy. I am blind. Let me see. Let me see the world as you want me to see it. Let me respond to the world as you want me to respond to it. Let me interact with things as you would interact with things. That is it. In fact, if anything, it leads us into number 4 in our notes. Jesus calls us to lean into the big ask. I could keep trying to drive home. The big ask is not how lofty our ambitions can be in this world. The big ask is a request that says, God, write on my soul what you most want. Right into my life, a passion for your passions. Don't let me settle for the lesser pleasures that are just distractions, and don't fill me up. The lowest of the distractions are the sinful things that are just fleeting pleasures that pull us deeper and darker into holes that we don't even want to be in the beginning. No, this is all about saying, I want the biggest thing of all, God. How can you unlock that in my life? In fact, I came across a quote this week that was really good from David Garland. He said, true prayer is not an endeavor to get God to change his will, but rather it's the endeavor to release that will in our lives. See, that should be the prayer, not God give me this and God give me that and God deliver this and God deliver that. Not inherently. The deeper thing in that is you're making those prayers maybe that you're saying, but God, I want what you want. And let me see, if you say no to what I want, let me see your no is a blessing and a good thing. That's a good gift as opposed to you said no, and I see it as a bad gift. No, it's always a good gift. But it just means we need to be more in tune with him. I want to round out with Psalm 37. I find this really kind of gets the essence of the big ask. It's both kind of what our responsibilities are and then what God does in the midst of all of that. He says this is David. He says, trust in the Lord and do good. Dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. Delight yourself in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. Now, I love this because the first section of that is all about the alignment element, right? The alignment is first what? Trust in the Lord, right? So as I'm bringing a prayer to God, I need to trust that he knows better than me. It might even be the best thing. You're asking for a child to come to know him or a spouse or a friend. It may be a really awesome thing you're asking and you're wondering, God, why aren't you showing up like day one with it? I went through that hardcore, man, like hardcore. I had a full-on cussing out God moment, man, like a couple months back. Just like, are you kidding me? I'm asking for a good gift. You're doing nothing. I'm so angry. And then there was like this pivot where I'm like, oh yeah. And then David eventually goes, oh, but I realize you're still God. And I had to pivot and be like, you're still God, and I'm sorry. I'm just frustrated. And this reminds me, you got to trust, man. You don't know what he's doing. You got to trust him. More than that, you got to trust, and then you got to do good. So I trust him, but then I take things in my own hands and I do some bad stuff. No, you got to trust and do good. And this says, dwell in the land and befriend faithfulness. So invest and then be faithful. And then he says in verse 4, delight yourself in the Lord. Delight yourself in the Lord. It's like making this conscious decision every day that says, I'm going to go and I'm going to rejoice in him and enjoy him and celebrate him and remind him, which is really reminding me of all of his glorious works and all of his great character and all of his good things, right? There's so many things we want to delight in more than God sometimes. I mean, in my own life, I want to delight in my family more, and I want to delight in the Seahawks more, and I want to delight in my hobbies more, and I want to delight in working in my yard more, and I want to delight in going to the gym more, and there's all kinds of things that absorb so much of my time, and I almost want those things to fill me up. And there are not bad things. Ecclesiastes says, hey, enjoy your wife, enjoy your family, eat good food, drink good wine. But you know what? Don't try to get all that stuff to fill you up. You enjoy those and you let God fill you. And so you delight yourself in the Lord, it says. But then from that, it says, he realigns us. He gives sight to our blindness, because it says, and he will give you the desires of your heart. This isn't saying he gives you whatever you want. What it's saying is he installs in you bigger, better desires. He installs in you something where you go, wow, now this is abundant life. This is way better than I thought it could be. I see much more clearly the realities of life and the gifts that God gives, and from that, it gives us a much better disposition. See, that's the bigger, better ask. See, what we're doing here reminds me of like when you're on a boat and you're coming up to a dock and you throw the line to the dock, right? And somebody on the other side grabs it and they tie it off, and then you begin to pull. Here's what you're not doing. You're not pulling the dock to you, right? You're pulling yourself to the dock. This is what we're doing. We're not pulling God to us in this process. When we throw the rope out and say, God, I want to delight in you. I don't want to do this. We're pulling to God, right? And the more we pull, the closer we get, the more it shapes us and aligns us with himself. We delight in him, and he gives us the desires of our heart. So the question remains, what do you want him to do? What do you want him to do in your life? Our answer should be to open our eyes to see what he wants to do in us. Because the whole thing is not about what we can dream up. It's all about what he wants to dream up in and through and for us. Let's go ahead and pray.